Holy Family of Nazareth, open your heart, Bible. Jesus and Mary are giving me a progressive message and a very detailed message. It is a message which is really all about the future of the world. And although the message does explain that many things will happen in the world which are not good, the message is also explaining that many things will happen in the world which will finally prove that the world is a really beautiful place. And I think that this is the most comforting and reassuring and positive statement of the message. The message really is a most comforting, loving, optimistic message, and Jesus and Mary are offering it to people who simply wish to believe in the fact that God is the being who has loved so deeply that his world has been created out of pure love, and people have been created out of pure love. And finally, because his design is a perfect design, he will be able to look at the world and see that it has achieved this. And he will be able to look at people and see that people have achieved this. Now Jesus and Mary explain that really the world is very fast approaching an event which will lead people increasingly to understand that God is very close to his world. They explain that the world at present is beginning to lose any understanding of God. And God is really so far remote from the world that people are thinking that they can exist without God. And Jesus and Mary are explaining through my message that increasingly, as the world now develops, God will enter the world in a supernatural way and will show people increasingly that he is very much with the world. The message also wishes to explain to people that God is so with the world that anyone who chooses to be with him will be shown very clearly how they can be with him. And as many negative things do happen in the world, these people will be led very carefully and lovingly and positively and precisely into a final plan of action which will allow them to be very protected and safe and secure. Jesus and Mary explain that really this final plan will increasingly show people that they can be very safe in a very physical way. And they ask people to simply believe that God would wish to show people that they are perfectly able to be with him in a very concrete way. Because as the world undergoes physical disasters, God simply wishes to show people that he is able to protect them very physically from these disasters. You see, Jesus and Mary are explaining that this message is all about a way in which people can learn for themselves that God really has made them so that they can be with him in a very individual way. And they're explaining increasingly through the message that God wishes people to enter this individual bond with him in a very personal way. Because he certainly has created people to be individuals. And Jesus and Mary explain that God is very distressed about the fact that people are not able to relate to him in this way, not able to relate to him in a personal way, which shows him that they believe that he is a loving God and a good God and a God who cares for them in a very individual way. So through this message and through this individual program, Jesus and Mary increasingly wish to explain to people the way in which they can be very close to God in an individual way, in a personal way, in a loving bond which they explain people can enter into with them too, so that increasingly they realize that the spiritual dimension of life is a dimension which is a very integral and easy part of life, and a part of life which we do really need in order to function in a true and a whole way. Jesus and Mary explain that really people have lost this ability to understand the importance of the spiritual dimension, because we're living at present in such an age of materialism that the physical part of life is the part to which we attach such a great importance that the spiritual dimension of life is really lost. They explain that really, if we can very simply enter into the spiritual dimension of life, we find that this is the whole meaning of life, because the spiritual dimension actually allows us to link it up very easily with the physical dimension, so that the two are working in a coordinated way. They explain that so much of the imbalance of life is because people are working on the one level, and the one level is not the way in which we have been created to function, because they explain so consistently the vital importance of the soul, and they explain so consistently the vital importance of the heart, which is very closely linked with the soul. They explain that today we have lost the ability to understand our soul, and we have lost the ability to understand our heart. They would explain that the soul and the heart are very related to each other. They explain that our soul is really the very deepest part of ourself. If we cut ourselves off from our soul, we're really cutting ourselves off from the very center of ourself. They explain also that our soul is very closely attached to God's soul, and it is from His soul that He is passing life into ourselves. Our soul is actually drawing His love energy into it and keeping us alive. And Jesus and Mary explain that this really is the bond that we should be finding, because if we can connect up with God in this way, from our soul to His soul, in a very loving way, then we begin to really understand our life and all its physical functions in a clear way. They explain very simply that we can learn to do this by understanding that the heart indeed has a very close link with the soul. And the heart is really all about love. And if we can begin to simply open our heart in a very real and true and loving way, then we'll begin to make contact with our soul and make contact with God. Because they explain that God is really all about love. And they explain too that we are really all about love. And if we can begin to really appreciate this in a very basic way, in a very simple, relaxed way, then quite clearly things will move into position and into focus, and we'll begin to understand exactly what we should be doing and why we're here and how we can develop our life more sensibly. They're explaining too that people have really lost the ability to love because they are entering into life in a very negative way. They explain that this is really because people have grown so attached to a materialistic understanding of life that they think that life is all about developing for themselves an existence which is very much linked with material goods and material commodities and things of this nature. And people become so weighed down by this that they really think that life is centered on this materialism. And they forget, in fact, that God has created them to really be very naturally happy. And to be very naturally happy in a loving way. And they explain that the natural way of being happy is really not to get mixed up with too much materialism, because materialism is really a very physical attachment to life, which by itself is not healthy. They explain that God has created the world in such a way that it is really a most beautiful place, and it is full of life and vitality and energy and colour, which He is really providing it with through His own love energy, through His light, through His whole spirit, which is flowing through the world. And if people forget this and think only of the physical, detaching it from God's spirit and God's love energy, then they are really looking at the world in a very morbid way. They're seeing it as a rather dead and inactive place. Jesus and I are explaining that people are also beginning to look at other people in this way. And they're beginning to look at themselves in this way. So that people themselves are beginning to be only half alive. And they're existing without vigour and vitality and energy and colour and a whole development of their being as a spiritual entity and a physical entity in a complete way. Jesus and I say we're not really living fully. We're not could be drawn on to keep us alive fully. And they're explaining too that the heart here has a very, very important function. Because really the heart actually has the ability to energize the body with this love energy from God. And if we were doing this, we certainly would be feeling very fully alive and positively energetic. Now, they're asking people at the moment to try very simply to begin to appreciate this fact and not to labour it or to try and analyse it too deeply, but just to link the idea of the heart with love and link the idea of love with God and the soul and the whole meaning of God giving life to the world out of love. So that really the whole meaning of the world and the whole meaning of people and the whole meaning of life is, or should be, about love. Now, I would ask you at the moment to enter this program, if you choose to move with them, in a very simple way. I would ask you first of all to just begin to assess for yourself for a moment in a very gentle way whether you think that you are a person who really does wish to live his life fully. I would ask you to ask yourself this question very gently, very easily, and in a very relaxed way. They'd ask you to find a moment in your day when you can be very relaxed, when you can simply ease yourself from some of the strains and the stresses of the day, physically and mentally, and relax with them for a moment, very simply, gently, easily and quietly. They would ask you to ask yourself if you think you are a person who wishes to enter life in a way that makes sense to yourself. Don't labour this thought, just let the thought come into your mind in a very relaxed way and try to give yourself the answer in a very relaxed way. And as you're trying to give yourself the answer, they would say, simply use your heart. Try to feel. Try to feel what you think you would like to do with your life. What you would like to be with your life. Where you think you're going in your life. Why you would want to live your life in the way that you think you would wish to live your life. And ask yourself if this is really satisfying you. If it's not satisfying you, they would ask you to simply reflect again. And this time, they would say to you, very simply and very gently, ask yourself why you think you're here. Why do you think you're here on earth living your life? suggest here that you're here on earth living your life for a very special reason. They would also suggest here that God Himself, who made you very specially, knows that reason. And they would also explain to you that God Himself, who has given you your life, knows that you are perfectly able to discover that reason. They would also say to you that as you really and truly begin to discover that reason, you, as an individual, will begin to feel so peaceful, so sure of yourself in a very balanced and complete way, that the sense of peace will be very, very deep and strong. They would also say to you that at present you can simply begin to find this very deep sense of peace by asking them and asking God to enter your life in a very loving relationship, which will show you increasingly that you are able to be with them in a very constructive way. Because Jesus and I explained through my message that they are really wishing to show people that people can be very, very close to them in an enlightened way. And they explain that the enlightened way is the way of the heart. And they wish to increasingly show people this way of the heart. And they wish to increasingly show people that the way of the heart is the only way. A very simple reflection is the following reflection, which they wish to offer you. Think very simply of the fact that God is the being who loves so deeply that He knows only love. This is the only absolute knowledge that He has, because in His understanding, everything belongs with love, in love, of love, through love. And anything outside love is simply not within His understanding. Now, God simply wishes to show you that you as an individual belong completely within this understanding of love, so that you can be with Him very beautifully and simply and in a complete way, which brings you great peace, comfort, and reassurance. He would ask you to begin to do this by simply relying on Him to show you. And if you are able to do this, He will show you so clearly that there will be no mistaking the fact that you are understanding love. Jesus and Mary explain that love is really the way in which we as people can begin to understand very simply that we have been made in God's image. And in very simple terms, they say this simply means that God has made us to be like Him, to look like Him, to think like Him, to feel like Him, to be like Him in love. Think about this, they say. Think about this in a very easy, relaxed, light, reflective way. And take heart from the thought, because Jesus and Mary explain through the message that they're consistently giving to me in a very detailed way, that this beautiful understanding of love and this beautiful understanding of man will finally be completed on earth. And in fact, this, they say, is God's final plan. And they explain that this message is leading people into this final plan very, very gently, systematically, positively, and practically now, so that people who choose will enter into it in a really beautiful and wholesome development, which they will continuously explain as you develop the relationship with them. Jesus and Mary are explaining to me very consistently the fact that God does wish in the days ahead to bring into the world a beautiful understanding of His love, a beautiful understanding of man's ability to love Him. And we know that really at present the world is not entering into this understanding in any forceful way. So Jesus and Mary are explaining through my message that increasingly God will bring into the world a supernatural help, which will be very concrete and very visible. Indeed, my message is trying to prepare people for this event. I'm trying to prepare people for this event in a most comforting and reassuring way, because the message that I receive from Jesus and Mary is very loving, very reassuring, and very comforting. And they're constantly trying to explain to me that God wishes to be so close to people that fear just begins to melt away. They explain that fear is really the root of so many problems in the world today. Fear is the root of so much distress and anxiety and suffering. They explain that God really does wish people to come to know Him so closely that they really do begin to depend on Him very deeply. This is the bond that they talk of between God and the individual. They're also explaining very clearly that God has created individuals with a particular bond which relates to Himself. And they're trying to explain through this message that in this final development of the world, because they do explain it to be a final development of the world, will increasingly show people who can just simply open their heart to him in love and trust that he is very, very close to them. And he can actually uplift them into a really new understanding of life. This message is so comforting because it's explaining that really this was Jesus' achievement for us. Jesus saw during his life that he could offer his life for us, so that finally the world would be able to link up with him in a communion of loving, which would show people increasingly as individuals that they could enter into this communion of loving with God and each other and actually restore the world to a harmony and a dignity which it needed so greatly at this point. Jesus and Mary explain that this is their whole vision. They have given their life to this vision, and they know that this vision will be accomplished. So they're asking people who are moving along with this message now to simply be aware of this really beautiful vision, this really beautiful hope for the future. And Jesus and Mary are explaining that with this hope for the future, people can begin to move now into a way of living which will increasingly show them that they are moving along with this vision of Jesus and of Mary, and they're actually helping in a practical way to make this vision a reality. This is what this message is all about. A plan of action, a way of loving and living, which can allow people to increasingly enter into it in a practical way, to move together in a practical way, to interact in a way of loving and living so positively that they begin to understand that they are really linking up completely with God's vision. And as they do so, they're beginning to understand that life is becoming simpler, clearer, happier, more beautiful, more colourful, more vibrant, more alive. And they themselves are entering into life in a way which is meaningful to them and functional and purposeful, and they're increasingly finding that life is something to be lived very fully, and their own life is something that they can enter into very fully in a most positive way. Now, as you enter into this program of Jesus and Mary, they would simply say to you, please believe that they are trying now to lead you very simply, very positively, very practically, and very precisely into a plan for peace which will increasingly develop and will increasingly show you your own particular part to play. They do ask you to be very patient. They do ask you to be very committed if you wish to follow this plan in some depth and in some detail, because they explain that the consistency of the plan means that it will be a very ordered plan, and people will be shown how to move into it in quite an ordered way, because they do explain that order is really the very basis of stability and truth and goodness and peace and love. And they want to show people that they can begin to enter into a really forceful, solid plan. They explain indeed that this will be God's final plan. That God will be showing people that they can work with this final plan in a very functional way. And they're asking you as an individual, as you begin this individual program with them, to simply believe this and to move along with this very trustingly, very lovingly, very hopefully, and very sensibly. And they're offering you a way of entering into a very practical relationship with themselves, which increasingly shows you that your life is based upon those principles of goodness and love and truth and peace and beauty and integrity and justice, those principles which really are God's fundamental principles of loving and living. The plan, which they explain will be a beautiful plan and a perfect plan, will simply develop along the lines of a way of life which is showing people increasingly that they can be perfectly contented in a very stable way. They explain that at present people are really not finding contentment in life. Life is giving them no sense of real, deep, positive peace, because people are not really understanding why they are moving through life. Jesus and Mary wish to explain through this message and through this program that you yourself can begin to move through your life in a very positive way, in a way which increasingly shows you that you yourself as an individual are becoming more peaceful and contented. At the moment, I would ask you to simply reflect upon the following. God really does wish to let me understand that I have been created by Him for a very special reason. He has given me life. He has given me many abilities, many talents, many qualities which are unique to myself. And God knows that if I discover these, if I really do discover these innate gifts that He has given me, and if on discovering them I begin to make use of them very functionally, then God knows that I will really find myself. Now Jesus and Mary explain that a very simple way of trying to understand these qualities, a very simple way of trying to begin to get to know what these qualities are, is by simply allowing oneself to enter into an interior dialogue with God and with Jesus and Mary in a very simple way. They explain that this really can be done, and this really can be done very simply. And they ask you to try. They explain to you that the way to try is by, first of all, relaxing in a physical way, and also by letting the cumbersome thoughts, the thoughts that are distressing you and worrying you, or even the thoughts that are burdening your mind in a complicated way, let go of them very gently and make yourself very easy and as unpressurized as you can. At a moment in the day when you can be quiet, alone, and relaxed. And in this moment, they would ask you to simply let yourself reflect very gently upon the following idea, and let this idea float through your mind in a very easy way. Let it just drift in and out of your mind in a very easy way, and let yourself respond to the easiness of the reflection, so that it really does just drift in and out very simply, very gently, and don't hang on to it in a complicated way. Let it drift in and out of your thoughts very easily. And let your heart play upon the idea, because they explain that the heart is really the way in which we do properly understand. We understand with the heart in an enlightened way, because the heart really does give us the ability to see clearly. Because the heart is really all to do with love. And if we are using our heart properly, we are simply trying to use it in a loving way. And as we begin to do this, we actually begin to understand that the heart is able to show us very clearly the way to go. And if we are trying to see the way to go in the right way, in a loving way, in a true way, then God will simply be with us as we do this. And God will simply allow us to see. God will simply begin to clarify our vision and our understanding and our feelings, so that we really are beginning to understand and to see more clearly. And because God is very close to us in this moment of using the heart and trying to really be with Him and understand where we're going in a true way, He will simply direct us in this way. And there will be no fear of taking the wrong path. There will be no fear of going the wrong way, because with enlightenment, people really do see clearly. Jesus and I ask you to simply reflect on this, and to do this in a very humble, sincere, and open way, understanding that if you really do wish to know where you're going, and if you really do wish to know the right way to go, and the true way to go, God would never mislead you, or misguide you, or let you do anything that is wrong. But they do explain that this really simple trust and openness is the crux of it all. And the opening of the heart is really the way in which we begin to understand all sorts of things that before were rather confusing to us and misleading to us and distressing to us. These things will increasingly become much simpler to understand. And because of this, many of the problems of life will begin to become much simpler to understand. And Jesus and Mary explain that many of these problems, in fact, will begin to dissolve, and the approach to life will begin to be much more positive and forceful and simple, uncomplicated, and really beneficial. So they would say to you, please try this little exercise. When you feel that you do need guidance, when you feel that you really do wish to understand what to do about a particular situation or problem, they explain that God will certainly show you what to do if you really open your heart and ask Him, and God will certainly show you what to do if you simply open your heart and ask them.